The year was 1929. A film was born. It was a silent film. It was a strange film, a powerful film, a film that would survive all others until the end of time. One film to rule them all. A small child, not more than 12 years old, saw this film with his mother. He did not speak for 3 days. He merely sat in his bedroom with the door closed. Eventually the boy came out of his room, walked up to his mother, and asked her,
"What was that weird shit?"
And that question has echoed down through the ages. What does it all mean?
I still remember the first time I spoke about Chien Andalou. David McCooey had got me to run a writing workshop down at the Geelong campus of Deakin. And just because of the sequence of events, I hadn't had access to the DVD beforehand, and I hadn't seen the film. And I watched it for the first time with the students. It was just so weird, and I had to stand up front of a lecture theatre and talk about this film with students I didn't know, about a film I'd never seen, and I didn't know what I was doing. I don't know why David could do that to me. I'm sorry, it's hard to talk about. Hi everyone, it's Adam Brown here, a more composed version of Adam Brown this time. It's my pleasure to be talking to you a little bit about Chien Andalou. And I should say right at the start that I'm going to mispronounce that at least 26 different times during this video. I've tried over the last 5 or 6 years and I never seem to perfect it according to those who are fluent in French, so I've just given up. I really do hope you enjoy this film. I think you're privileged to be able to study it. It's a fascinating film, and I hope that some of the points I make in this video are of interest. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm doing quite a few lectures via YouTube these days, and it's kind of fitting that I can talk to you via the screen. I'm sure that people's first experience of this film, for those who have seen it, was relatively similar to mine. You're on the spectrum between OMG and WTF. This is a fascinating film, and I hope that you really engage fully with it. And I really recommend watching it again, and preferably again, because the more you watch, especially this kind of film, the more you will get out of it. So for everyone watching this recording, particularly off-campus students, make sure you've seen the film before you proceed with this video. I don't want to spoil the film and the shocks for anyone. It's also very important that you access an authentic version, so grab a copy from the library and don't rely on the many problematic YouTube versions. I'm sure that there's a Britney Spears soundtrack version out there and a John Farnham version and who knows what else. So make sure you do see the one that we're looking at here. Just to give a quick rundown of the structure of this lecture, I'll start off with some general theoretical discussion, in particular the historical context of surrealism and modernity. Then we'll go on to a section on looking at the modernist elements in an Andalusian dog. I'll then move on to what I'm calling a preliminary analysis of the film. Does it mean anything? I'm calling this a preliminary analysis because in many respects I think any analysis of the film is going to be to some degree preliminary. I don't want to give the impression that I'm trying to give a comprehensive, overarching or final interpretation of this film. And I'm going to point to multiple ambiguities and differing kinds of interpretations that can be generated from different sections of this film. I'm also in this part of the video going to have a short conversation with Dr. Deb Waterhouse-Watson, a feminist scholar, about the representation of women in the film. And then I'll conclude with some brief reflections on Chien Andalou and the shifting nature of meaning. So in terms of surrealism and modernity, surrealism is one of the many isms that you've no doubt been talking about throughout the unit. So as a movement that transformed artistic representation in the early 20th century, surrealism's influence encompasses much more than just film, but it also influenced painting, sculpture, fiction, poetry, theatre and music. André Breton broke with the Dadaists and wrote the Manifesto of Surrealism, which is very interesting to have a look at if you get a chance. He first did so in 1924 and then again in 1929. Surrealism has a much debated definition, and the ambiguity of this is somewhat appropriate, I think, to the movement. Cardinal and Short have discussed what I think is a really interesting concept of permanent revelation being intrinsic to surrealism. This seems to imply the impossibility of obtaining final meaning, or any meaning for that matter. Cardinal and Short note that surrealism's, quote, spirit is one of exploration, its thought intrinsically dynamic, end quote. On the other hand, Baldick writes that surrealism comprises a, quote, free association of random images brought together in surprising juxtaposition. Surrealism has also been influenced by the symbolists and Freud's writings on the id, the ego, and the superego. Surrealists are preoccupied with the unconscious mind and its repressed sexual desires. The movement is premised on the possibility of attaining knowledge beyond realism, or the marvellous. So an interesting issue to reflect on these days is that surrealist film was seen to be a vehicle for the subconscious. Several decades ago, Gershon wrote that film, quote, simulates a world in which dream and reality are one. And there's many similar sentiments throughout the literature on surrealism. Is film a particularly appropriate medium for expressing surrealist ideas? Coensley has written that, quote, the cinematic apparatus is used by surrealist filmmakers as a powerful means to realistically portray the symbolic order, which they disrupt with shocking, terrifying images. Breton himself, who produced the manifestos of surrealism, wrote that, quote, nothing could be more coherent, more systematic, or more richly yielding of results, end quote, than true surrealist films. And this would seem reminiscent of T.S. Eliot's claim that his poetry, or good poetry, has cohesion. And the idea of some artworks like the poem The Wasteland or this film Chien Andalou having cohesion or coherence is somewhat paradoxical. Surrealists viewed their mode of representation as the only true form. Everyone else was just wrong. And what's really interesting is that surrealist filmmakers were not only subverting the mainstream commercial cinema, but also avant-garde cinema, which Matthews has pointed out appealed to reason. So in that sense, even though this is very early in a new medium, they were trying to still make things newer than the new. Moving on to a few points about the work of Louis Bunuel and Salvador Dali. Chien Andalou is the seminal film of the surrealist movement. The film was directed by Bunuel in 1929, and Bunuel continued to direct films until 1977. He even made a version of Wuthering Heights, which I haven't seen, although I'd be fascinated to see what he did with it. He actually got more conventional as time went on. So Bunuel co-wrote the film with Dali, a surrealist painter whose artwork served as a source of inspiration, themes and ideas for the film. You can see an article by Lopez that I've referenced at the end of this video for further details on Dali's contributions. Ironically, both men claim credit for the film in the years following, and they actually had a big falling out and were not really very good friends afterwards. Dali called Bunuel a communist, and really it went downhill probably pretty quickly from there. But to get an idea about Dali's contributions to the film, I'd strongly encourage you to have a look at some of his artwork, such as The Wounded Bird from 1928, which seems to be an image of a severed thumb or finger on the pavement. You've also got the rotting donkey, which you no doubt remember from the film. That was also painted in 1928. And there's also one interesting one from 1927 called Apparatus and Hand. One of the more direct relationships between one of Dali's paintings and the film would be the ants, which you can have a look at fairly easily. That was a painting from 1929. Crucially, the filmmakers were affected by post-World War I sentiments. You've no doubt already been talking about different approaches, such as in Eliot's The Wasteland, perhaps, of people who are disillusioned with so-called human progress. The destruction of that time period was massive, culturally, environmentally, socially, and so on. So that really did influence Bunuel and Dali. So think about that in relation to a lot of the imagery in this film. Another really interesting film by Bunuel is L'Âge d'Or from 1930, The Age of Gold. And this has even more explicit references to the war. It actually starts with a scene showing a dying soldier. And the film is also engaging with fetishistic sexuality in relation to this kind of violence. Crucially, shocking people is also a hobby for Bunuel and Dali. There's a fantastic featurette on the commercial copy of the DVD, if you can get a hold of it, where Bunuel's son, who's being interviewed for this sort of mini documentary, is talking about the university days of his father. His father was encouraged to study agricultural engineering by his father, who wanted him to have a real job. He was more interested in literature and poetry. So at university, Bunuel met Dali, and they also made friends with another artist, Federico Garcia Lorca, and they used to influence each other in their aspirations with their artworks. And they used to also undertake some university pranks. And so they get one of their female friends to dress up as a prostitute and get on the trolley, or what we know as a tram, and some way down the line, Dali or Lorca would get on dressed as a priest and start harassing the prostitute. And then Bunuel, dressed as a police officer, would get on the trolley and beat up the priest and say, "What are you doing? You're always doing this, molesting prostitutes." And so then they'd all get off the tram and go have a drink somewhere. Just to shock people. The point was to shock.